The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Laura Kaminsky, and as Associate Director of Education, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opening night of our series, Artists' Visions. This series, now in its fourth season, has provided an annual forum for leading painters and sculptors to present their aesthetic philosophies, to discuss their approaches to their art, the sources of their inspiration, and to share with you their feelings about the evolution and development of their life's work. In previous seasons, we have been honored by the participation of Robert Motherwell, Susan Rothenberg, Jim Dine, Anthony Caro, Mary Frank, and Chuck Close, among others. This year, the guests are among the most eminent creators living today, and we are proud to present George Rickey, Elizabeth Murray, Judy Pfaff, and Mark Tansey in 4 evenings of visual presentation and conversation led by Patterson Sims, our series moderator. The format tonight and for the remaining evenings of the series is as follows. In just a few minutes, George Rickey will discuss his work, aided by video, slides, and the unusual addition of actual pieces, which are displayed here tonight. Following his presentation, he will be joined on stage by Patterson Sims for discussion, after which there will be an opportunity for you to submit written questions on the index cards you received upon entering the hall. During the course of the evening, ushers will come down the aisles, collect your cards, and bring them backstage for presentation. We are delighted that Patterson Sims is moderating this series once again. For those of you who were with us in the audience last year, I need not remind you of his well-conceived questions, of his respect for and deep knowledge of each of the visiting artists, and for his snazzy ties and socks. For newcomers, let me only say that Patterson's contribution to the series has elevated its quality and broadened its scope, even beyond that of what our distinguished artists can provide alone. Mr. Sims has served as Associate Curator of the Permanent Collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art since 1976, a position which he has held with integrity and imagination. Immediately following the second evening of this series, November 3rd with Elizabeth Murray, Patterson assumes the position of Associate Director for Art and Collections at the Seattle Art Museum. He will, of course, come back to New York for the final 2 evenings of our series, and we all wish him good luck in his new appointment. Our guest this evening is George Rickey. Born on June 6, 1907, in South Bend, Indiana, the third of 6 children, Mr. Rickey's family moved to Scotland in 1913, where he was educated. He later went to Oxford and then to Paris for a year of art school. He returned to the United States in 1930, maintained a studio in New York, and devoted his energy exclusively to painting. In 1949, he turned to sculpture and has since become one of the most recognized of living artists. He has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Fine Arts Award, a Stipendiat from the Deutscher Academy in West Berlin, a Fine Arts Award from the American Institute of Architects, and he was elected to the American Institute of Arts and Letters in 1974. Mr. Rickey's works are on display throughout Europe, the United States, and Japan. In this country, they are included in permanent collections of the Whitney, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Smithsonian Institution and Hirshhorn, and the Corcoran Gallery, among many others. Because of the kinetic nature of his graceful sculptures and mobiles, Mr. Rickey has often been considered a successor in the genre of the late Alexander Calder. Art critic Hayden Herrera has written of Mr. Rickey's work. His sculptures chart a meeting of man's imagination and knowledge with the workings of nature. Nature's physical laws are his arena, and his approach to nature is both passionate and humble. To see Rickey's lucid yet mysterious sculptures in the wind, is to be convinced that they express his own poetic awe at the rhythms and order of the universe, and perhaps his sense of triumph at the participation of human intelligence in that universe. It is indeed an honor to welcome George Rickey tonight. Thank you.
An event like this brings out the school teacher in me. So I got a blackboard, and I'm going to try and explain a little of what the thinking is, in a way, the theory that is behind these objects that I've gotten myself involved with. You all know that I'm involved with a sculpture which moves. Now, as soon as there is motion, there is also the involvement of time. So I'm concerned about time. And of course, the classic example of time, measure of time, is the pendulum. So I'm going to start with explaining the pendulum, because actually all the pieces I make, whatever their form, really contain the essence of the pendulum principle. So I'll go to my blackboard, and I have to trail this with me, I think. Now, a simple pendulum, such as what you find in a grandfather clock, consists of a rod, if it's about a yard long, and has a weight on the bottom, and is mounted so that it's free to swing. The time of the swing is about a second, and that's been used for centuries for making clocks, the grandfather clocks. And of course, there have been improvements in that, so that there's a substitute for the pendulum with a balance wheel, with a spring on it, and so on. But even that balance wheel is functioning in the same way as a pendulum. This is a simple pendulum, and the time that it takes to swing from side to side depends on the length. If it's about a yard long, the time is a meter. Pardon me, if it's a yard long, a meter long, the time is about 1 second. If it is 2 yards long, the time side by side will be about 2 seconds. You see it, and that can be controlled very precisely. That is a simple pendulum. The support is there. It's free to swing. The time is dependent on the length. It's not dependent on the weight. I think one learns that in school probably, that you can make it can weigh 1 pound, 2 pounds. It is still 1 second if it's a yard long. Now, there's another kind of pendulum, a compound pendulum, where there is, once again, the fulcrum. There is a weight below. It swings from here. But if one continues this above and puts a weight above it, the rules all change. It is no longer dependent, the time is no longer dependent on the distance of the weight from here. The time will depend on the weight times the distance here in comparison with the weight times the distance above the fulcrum. As those two moments, as they're called, that's the technical term for the weight times distance, as those become more nearly equal, the period of swing of this compound pendulum gets longer. And when they are very close, the period begins to get very long. Now, I'll demonstrate it. I brought a few little gadgets with me. There is a blade such as has been seen in my sculptures. Here is the fulcrum. I taped some weight on below, some extra weight, and of course there is weight above. Here it is heavy. There's a lot of lead in here. It's heavy but short. Here it is much lighter but long. And if I put that there, you see it will swing. Now, if I take one of those weights off, it now swings a little slower. If I take that one off, it swings very slow. Now, that's actually the essence of my control of time. And you see it here. Now, I should go on one step further. If I add some more weight above, so that the moment above is equal to the moment below, the time becomes infinite, and you have a wheel. It may not be round, but if it's equal above and below, it will balance in any position. So I stop just short of that, you see, so otherwise I can't control it. So this very simple arrangement, you see, is something I think about every day. And whenever I make a piece, this is involved in it. Now, I've shown this, you know, with the vertical, like a grandfather clock, but it can be, the common form, of course, is this with a child on each end, and it's a teeter-totter. But that also follows the same principles. Now, if there's a child here and a child here, it is actually unstable, and it'll go down one side or the other, depending on which child is heavier, until it hits the ground. And, their feet do, anyhow. It's a rather kinetic blackboard, I see. I have to anchor it. Now, if I have a wire bent like that, see that? There's the fulcrum. This, though horizontal, also functions as a pendulum, and the weight will be below the point of support. You see, if it's curved like that, the center of gravity will be a little bit below. It will be stable and will rock from side to side and maintain these pendulum properties. So that is, see, there's that form, simple. Here, compound. Here, not vertical but horizontal. Now also, if I were to make a wheel, we'll say with spokes, and here a pivot. If that pivot is absolutely vertical, really vertical, this, in theory, would stop in any position. But if it's tipped a little bit, and if at one point here, a weight were put on that outer rim of this circle, that would swing around to the low point. It would swing around like this, and finally end up at the lowest point it could reach. So these are all involved with the same principle, but in very different forms. These forms are available, and these are what I've looked into and have begun to exploit. Now, I'll show you just one or two. Here is a two-story affair, and maybe I should explain something about that. I'll keep this captive. As a matter of fact, I think there's a brake on. I think there's a brake on it, isn't there? Yeah. Okay, that's better. See, I've got other resources. I can have a blade. Oh, I should tell you about something else, I guess. Like that, mounted there. And I can mount that blade on another blade. Like that, and support that somewhere from the ground. And that is a pendulum, such as I've shown here. Here is another one. The weight down here will have to support this weight plus all of that in order to perform as I want it to. That is much more difficult. However, I brought an example of that here. Where that is just heavy enough. You see, that's right at the brink. So in something like this, of course, time becomes a very important component. I want it to be slow. I want it to be so that it is not just a repetition of quick vibrations and so on. I want it to be slow enough so that you have to wait to see what's going to happen. And then another property of this is if it is controlled, if this time is controlled so that it's very slow, at the same time, it becomes much more sensitive. So it will respond to very small supplies, very, very slow-moving air. Now, what I was going to say something about how that is supported. If I were to just have a form like that and wanted it to oscillate back and forth, I could do it by just putting a rod through it, shall we say, and then supporting that here and here. And it would swing like this, like the teeter-totter, you see, or if it were horizontal, or this way when it's vertical. Now, that means, if I do that, supporting it both sides, I've got to have two vertical supports in order to keep it in, where I want it. And that is, that gets pretty big, pretty clumsy. It's stationary. And a moment came when I wondered if I could support something like this on only one support. And after I found out how to do it, I felt very stupid for having taken so long. If I have this and only one arm, of course, if I put something under there, it's going to fall right off. So the simple solution is to support it right there. Can you see that from the back? Can you see what I'm drawing? There's a limit to the size of the blackboard unless I turn it on its side. If I support that there, it will immediately fall off the support. So what I do is put a stop on the other side there. So as this tries to rock back this way, it rotates on that point and is stopped by that point. And of course, that's what I have in these here. So that's how that is made. It's got a notch here on the bottom, a notch here on the top, and then this, what I call a cradle. You see, to sit that in, it has one notch here up and one down, and it goes in and is free to move and very simple. Now, it is terribly simple, you see, and you can see why I felt so stupid not to have thought of it earlier. So that also, for these early pieces that I made, you see, indoor pieces, this was really essential to arrive at a means of supporting moving components in a way that was free of friction. These are on knife edges, you see, like this, that are polished so that there's very little friction, and with a breath, you see they will move. Then, of course, you see, I got ambitious and tried to see if I could do it two-story. And this is just an experiment in a way to show this can be done. And I have now gone on from this and have been able to do outdoor pieces on this principle that are really quite large. But the one requirement is that this component be very light. This, of course, has to be stiff enough to support the weight, and this must have enough room in it to put a sufficiently large counterweight so that it will support this weight above. Well, I've managed to do that, and also I have, you see, one doesn't stop. You see, one wonders if there's a next step. I've managed to do it outdoors with 3 stories. See, and where the difference, the steel may look the same, but where the top may be 10 thousandths, material 10 thousandths thick, and the third one down may be even a 16th of an inch thick. See that these technical requirements begin to appear. And I have had to learn that. I was not trained in any of this sort of thing. Had to learn how to handle it. So there are some of there is a basic device. Now, one other thing about this to note is that on a bearing of this sort, this moves through a plane. And that's you know, a lot can be done with that. And of course, if you get a group of them, they in a way play with each other. But I began wondering whether it was the possibilities of movement were limited to a plane. And of course, where you have 2 points of support like this, it's very difficult to make something that moves through a curved path. However, I thought I would try it, and so I arrived at this, which looks much the same. It's very heavily weighted at the bottom there. Perhaps if I stick that on the top, it'll slow it down. Some of this is unrehearsed, I might say. So, if I add another one on, since I add weight above, this is getting slower. I'm getting nearer to the limit. It'll still reverse. Now, on big pieces, I go through what you've just seen here. I don't do it quite so fast, and I don't do it with tape. But it is very important, but I have a kind of limit. You see, I don't want the top and the bottom to be equal, because then, as I said, it would stop in any position. You've lost the control. But I slow them down. And in the end, with large pieces, I do it with a stopwatch, so that I know that I'm getting slower. But the limit on the big outdoor pieces, you know, with maybe something 20 feet high, will be the point where, if it is rained on, the weight of the water will send it over the edge. I stop short of that, where the weight of the water is enough to make it unstable. So this was all, you know, in a way learned bit by bit. Now, I've demonstrated again. You see the effect of the the placement of weight and the control of time. But now there's something else here. What I've shown you so far, as I said, the components move through a plane, but this doesn't. And it moves through a curved path. And the reason why is that with this, the bearing was at right angles to this main form. If I make it at 45 degrees, the rules change, and the path will be curved. You see, and actually, this moves from vertical to horizontal, and the path is a cone. And this is a bit surprising for us, because most of the movement that we see in nature, if you throw a stone, for example, it may fall this way, but it falls through a plane. A wheel turns through a plane. See, most of the things, most of our experience of movement from childhood on, you see, is movement that is essentially planar, but other forms are possible. See, so this is in a way, this opens up a completely other door. I believe, if I had the time, I might be able to design a way of mounting a moving line like this so that it moved in a figure 8. But I haven't come to that yet. Skaters can do it. Okay. Now, this in a way has to do with my grammar, doesn't it? You see, this it has to do with grammar and with feasibility. You see, before I make something using these components, I have to establish that I can make it and that will be worth having made. Now, this the shaft being at an angle other than 90 permits this line to move through a cone. Now, there is another way to get that kind of movement, and that is to mount on a universal joint. You see that? Can move through that, and it's mounted on a very ancient device called a gimbal, no relation to the store or the former store. A gimbal is, in essence, a ring with a set of supports. I'm going to do them in my style, those knife edges, that is mounted on some sort of support. And that can then rock like this. And then inside this is another ring that is mounted with the same thing on this, so that that is mounted there and there. And this ring can rock this way between those 2 points, and the outer ring can rock this way between those 2 points. And because of that combination, there is this complete movement, you see, in any direction. And this was invented, I think, maybe in the 15th century for mounting compasses and ships. And also in early ships where they had oil lamps, they wanted that lamp to stay upright. Those lamps were all mounted in gimbals. And you have the same device of these crossed rings. You see, they can move, each can move in a way independently of the other in the back of every car. Every drive shaft has one of those. They call it a universal joint, you see, but the old name was a gimbal. So this is also available. And here, in this little this is a sculpture. You see, this is not a teaching device, but I'll use it. This is mounted on gimbals. See that's the gimbal. And instead of being 2 rings, it is really an X. You see it, I've got the 2 sets of bearings that are at right angles to one another. And this has a set of bearings that is mounted, and then those get mounted here. It has the same essentials as the gimbals for a compass. And then what is happening there is that this is also functioning as a pendulum. You see, it has a low side. You see, it'll swing, the low point will swing down between the 2 pivots. And that too can be made in any of a large number of variations. See, these become means. And I've sometimes been asked, why I gave up painting. And my pat answer to that is that I didn't give it up, I just don't do it. And then also why I don't use color. In some early pieces, I used color. But a point came, you see, where I realized that the relative movement of these various parts with their relation to time and so on, this was my equivalent to color, and that actually if I colored the parts, it was counterproductive. See, I think, and also the other, something that went with that was to use forms that don't have any interest in themselves. And then the interest can reside in the movement. Okay, the one remaining thing I have here, well, maybe. One other thing to tell you is that the material for these things to work must be rigid. If the material itself is floppy, none of these rules really hold because the material is bending, sagging. So I use steel. I use stainless steel because it saves a lot of trouble with corrosion. It's also stainless steel is very hard, very strong, and these whatever the forms are, they have to be stiff enough so that they retain the relationship between the center of gravity and the support points. That is critical to me, and that is a matter often of even very large pieces of very small distances, maybe a few thousandths of an inch, to make the piece stay upright, behave as it should. So I have to have rigid material in all of these, and then I try to reduce friction because that makes it more responsive. So these parts are polished. Now, one gets into new adventures, and I saw this on the bench before I left, upstate. It's a miracle I'm here. Yesterday I woke up to 16 inches of snow. But I'm working up there on a sculpture for a theater in Rotterdam. And I don't want to go into it too deeply, but if you can imagine this distance from here to here being 20 feet and mounted about 25 feet up on the facade of this theater, which opens on a square. And these are mounted not on knife edges, on ball bearings, you see, but with all of these controls that I've been speaking of, and it is 3 stories. You see, here's what's fixed. This is fixed to the building, and then this, which can move, this can move, this can move in relation to the part next to it. And what the movement, you see, this is in a way compounding this, you see, one on another. See, this can go to here, this can go to here, and this, when my right hand is fixed, this can go to here. So that's what's cooking now. You see? And so here's the grammar, you see, and out of the grammar comes, in a way, what might a sort of language. and with this slowness, with these very simple forms. You see, they're geometrical forms. They are squares, triangles, occasionally circles. In order to, if the forms themselves were interesting, if they were, petal forms, flower forms, and so on, that is then a whole other story. So it is in a way, the forms are arid, you see, in the hope that the movement can be fruitful. Now, I think that what comes next is a videotape of very recent pieces. Some of this was made just before the snow. It's about 20 minutes of videotape. There is a soundtrack in which you hear it was unrehearsed. You see, it's just patched together out of things that were taped while they were going on. And I'll comment as that goes on. Sometimes you'll hear the anguished voices of my helpers up there, but I'll also comment. I've got this wrong. Have I got this the wrong way around? Is it the slides? Video, yeah, the video first. You see, in a way, if you see the video first, when I show you the slides, you can imagine what the movement is. You see, so I'm going from movement to still slides. I finish up with a few slides of pieces from long ago. And I'll move this aside so that you can... Yeah.
We'll take this to the other side so you can understand.
Yeah, okay. Now, some of this tape was literally just made this last week. Perhaps I should comment a little on videotape. See, I used this. If I don't show movement, I'm showing. If I just show photographs, it's untrue, of course. You see it, and I think that I was looking for means of reproduction. You see, of recording that would show some of what I'm actually doing, because the still photograph is really lying, isn't it? And I had Super 8 films, and then along came videotape. See, and I'm really a very low-tech type. And we don't have a television set in our house, but I have a pretty good video camera that I got down on 40th Street here, and also the means to copy. And I no sooner got it than I began to realize what the shortcomings were. And they're enormous. But it will do certain things that are, it will show movement, and it's very fast, because you have your image, as soon as that cassette is done, you have your image, and it's possible to take an image off that and copy it. But of course, I soon learned that when you get to about the third copy or the fourth copy, you have a completely new art form. Okay, should we start this up now? Can we have the tape? It's coming. Now, there is a three-level piece. These two are studies for this piece in Rotterdam. Actually, there are three of them. You see, with triple jointed. And that's my apple tree that is completely demolished since day before yesterday. Now, see, each of these has a bearing in it, a shaft, a bearing at 45 degrees, a counterweight. The shapes of the three segments are very similar, different in length, but the thickness of the material that you see is, of course, very different. And there you can see the shaft at 45 degrees, or at least I think you can. Am I in the way of you people? Yeah, shouldn't I get over to the side here? Is this in the way too? And in the final version, which I'm working on now, this has been very slow. I've been working on this a year. The central piece will be, I think, 8 or 9 feet long.
But you see, if it comes to reduce
these sounds
weight,
are the sounds of the ambient sounds of the studio.
Right. That becomes really a design factor of some importance. That can move 3 inches up.
That sound was my train.
See, and it leaves suspension here, that great empty space.
And the white shirt is my engineer. I get an engineer to do calculations for me.
Of improvement, you know, if we add 50%, maybe we can the depth. Certain things would begin to diminish. These would stay the same size. Yes, that would be the weight. Think of the possibility that we make this twice as big, twice as deep.
It appears to be
Keep
hand-built.
this proportion the same. The whole thing 2.5 times the size, which is huge. And that an effect of that will be that the bearing will be completely contained. It won't emerge. So it will get a little simpler. But the hardware will be, the connectors will be this size in proportion. But because of the greater bulk, they will be not, they won't be so obvious. From this great flat surface are 3 steel cages. Just, they're about 21 by 21 feet, sticking out 10 feet, just empty, it's just HB. Yeah. They're there, and this is what we've attached to.
Okay, I think I might have seen it earlier.
The early, because I had those on a board.
Yeah.
And those HBs, which I think they're called, there will have to be a strut, really, going back into the wall to carry that load.
Now this switches to some shots from an exhibition in Los Angeles last year. Now see, each of these 4 L's is mounted in that 45-degree way, so each moves through a cone. The same with these open forms. I was quite interested in these open forms where the shape is traced instead of filled in, and you can see the landscape through it. And here you see this is 2 pairs, and each pair makes a rectangle at rest. You see, and then it's split and it splits apart. And with these open forms, another result is that you get the 2 forms added. You see, it's additive. The surface is ground with a disc, with a carborundum disc, not to secure any particular effect, but to make it very responsive to light. The material, as it comes from the factory, is just a dirty gray. These are some indoor pieces at that same exhibition. This is enormously magnified. This is a piece about a foot high. That's another thing you can do with videotape, apparently. And this is a hexagon on the wall made of 6 equilateral triangles. And they move in and out from the wall. And there's a cube, which has, of course, 6 surfaces made in the same way, but this is a very recent piece. It's taken me 5 years to get this done. It's about 50 feet high. Each blade is 30 feet deep. And we got it up about 10 days ago, before the snow. And that sound is the wind in the microphone. That's another thing about videotape. So you pick up the wind as well. There's a figure. I try to get a scale figure into these, so it gives you an idea of the size. And these, as you have noted, these also move from vertical to horizontal, not from up to down. I've been working with these W forms, and composed them with 4. I'm sorry that wobbles so much. That's in the machine. It's not me. Each of these is 4 feet across. So the sculpture is 8 feet wide. And this sort of gray shape at the bottom, that's a scale figure that's put in there. I think that rushing stream is once again the wind. And I think you'll hear the cricket in the background. And this is a sculpture made with 3 L's. Each of the L's is 18 feet long. And one of these is in Cleveland, and one is in front of a bank, and one is in Atlanta in front of Coca-Cola. Now, this piece, all angles, was a study for a large sculpture 3 times the size of this, that's now in West Berlin as part of the 750th birthday of Berlin. And the full-size piece was about 30 feet high. You see a scale figure down at the bottom here, too. See that little white shape. And you see, this it uses that double jointed, you see, but with a change in the forms. And the odd shape of the chassis, the support, it's not just to be fancy, you see, it is actually where there is space to have that support go up and not be hit. This is like the double decker that I showed you. This is a triple decker. It's three, well, they're really N shapes, like a capital N, and they are mounted one on the other. It stretches out, but that's because of the form in which it was done. See, so this is actually a triple component piece, mounted one on the other, but in such a way that it stretches out horizontally rather than going up vertically. I think I can't do it with 4. I think this is the limit. There has to be in the last, in the short section now to the left, that has to contain enough weight to support all the other 3. And there's only so much room. And I'm quite interested in trapezoids. You see, that is halfway between a rectangle and a triangle, isn't it? And when they overlap, you see, they begin to make forms of their own shapes, a little like a drawing. There's my scale figure walking out. This goes to San Francisco, to a one block park in San Francisco, and I think gets installed. It's out there. It gets installed next week. This is all before the snow. This, you see, four lines mounted on this Y. The Y is free to rotate. You see, it's on a vertical axis through 360 degrees. And here, six lines. You see, 3 each way opposing, and with 4 of those lines, they can be free to rotate all the way round. But as soon as you have 6, there would be collisions. So that, there's certain limits one runs into. And these all have shock absorbers on them because they go so low that somebody could grab them. And if they were in some safe place or on water, I would take those shock absorbers off and let them swing freely. But this is deep in the country, but it's not uninhabited, see, and I don't want somebody to get their eye poked out. This is, it's just 4 squares of equal size, composed and able to rotate in 2 axes. And once again, the overlapping of the squares, that interests me. The square is not interesting in itself, but when you get a square, one square laid on top of another, it becomes something else. And I spoke about this conical movement that one gets by putting the shaft at an angle. And I made 2 or 3 pieces in which I actually describe what the cones would look like. You see the skillful cameraman. Now, this a couple of installations. A very large piece, and first preparing what it's going to be mounted on. This is a temporary installation. See, I won't send a piece out unless we've put it up beside my studio, and in short, I want to make all my mistakes at home. And see, that post has been lowered onto a foundation. Bolts have to go through, bolt that down, and then we'll lift the rest of it with a crane and plug it into the top. This is a sculpture being remounted. This was several years ago in my exhibition at the Guggenheim, standing in front of the museum. And then it was bought by a firm called Thiokol. You've heard of them, who got married to Morton Salt, and then developed rocket trouble. And I got it back. I bought it back. And then when we went down there to get it, this building was empty, and this was standing, it was rather forlorn, in front of the building. They sent a man from Chicago, having insisted on a certified check. He picked up the check and took the plane back to Chicago. And I now have the sculpture in itself. Now, it's quite tricky to get the bearings to slide down on the shaft. You see, because if it's cocked a little bit and it's hanging from a crane, remember, it will tend to jam. So it's there. This is, instead of hanging one piece on the top of another, this is one ring inside a ring inside a ring, with these triangular surfaces on, partially for visual reasons, but there is one triangle that is also the sail, the one in the lower right there. That is the sail, that's the pusher. That's my walk-on part again. the bearing system in a piece like that, where the span is quite long, that is quite tricky. You can't use ordinary ball bearings because they might tend to jam through slight misalignment. But fortunately, there exist self-aligning bearings, which permit a certain dislocation of the axis and still remain free. Now, this is a provisional foundation for another piece. We make these big steel X's that will support a lot of. There's my engineer on the right. He tells us how big to make these X's so they won't blow over when we don't want it. Now, we're putting styrofoam under that chain. The post, which is going to be lifted and set, is stainless steel, but that chain is just steel, and enough can rub off. That plane is rubbing, you see it against the stainless steel. Enough can rub off so that a week later it can show up as rust. So that funny arrangement with the styrofoam is to keep the chain from contaminating the stainless steel. And why do we have the chain there? It's because that is slung around the top, and we want to make sure that sling doesn't slip up, and so the chain comes all the way down to the bottom. See, now they can slip out because the chain is hanging here. You see that base plate with all the ribbing on it? That is to support the piece that's going to go on that. It's a very large piece in an 80-mile-an-hour wind. But it is going to be set. This goes to California. It's going to be set in a pool, so those ribs will be underwater.
All you got to do is just keep coming down. You got to get some bolts in there and draw it down. We don't have a crowbar here. Yeah, we do. Where's the crowbar? Where's the crowbar?
Now these two elements that go on top are rectangles, 20 feet long, 5 feet wide, and about 1.5 feet thick. And they are mounted on top, and you can see that sort of T-form in the middle. Those are the shafts. This is a very large, very heavy piece. Well, we have to have a hole because it'll tend to settle whichever way the water is.
It's going to freeze out there.
Where, in California?
Not supposed to.
Do you have bolts? Do you bolts up there? No, that are just also what
We tether this with ropes because as soon as it's up, the wind can catch it and throw it against the crane. Now these brilliant colors that appear, you see, that is a function of videotape, not a sculpture.
Frank, Joe, you gotta boom out about 2 inches.
This is, as you saw before, this is the tricky part to get this.
Right.
It has to go straight down or it won't go in.
All right, get your hands out of there. Shake the post. It's coming down.
That's why he has to have his hand out there.
Shake that post. Shake the post. That's going.
Okay, it's down.
Hey. That's a lot heavier than the other ones. Can you get that tackle off, Joe? How much heavier is that at the other one? Hey! You gotta give me some slack. Slack.
Then you have the problem of unhooking the crane. Keep that right, you know. He has a degree in physics.
Hey, take it up. Right?
But I've never seen
This is a different drama, you see.
I've never been here when, like last summer when they took them all down.
You just gotta swing that around. Hey, Scott, why don't you swing it around? So you can take the other one. Really, drive it.
You found your filter, huh?
Yes, I did have the filter.
Yeah, he said it. That's right. About twice.
I put the neutral density 9 on.
One's up and one's down.
Right. This one swings a lot.
Now, I should say, this is down already. This went up about 3 weeks ago. We took it down last week. It is now, yesterday it was under 1.5 feet of snow. And the truck was supposed to come for it today, but I'm sure the truck won't. Now, you see how slowly that moves. That is all involved with what I talked about at the beginning. You see, with the placement of weights, there's, I think, about half a ton of counterweight in the short end. It's blocks of stainless steel. I didn't want to put lead in because lead eventually stains the outside. And finally, it comes down really to ounces. And with timed, these are timed for a natural period of about 50 seconds, compared with if a pendulum a yard long with a period of 1 second.
Don't go down near there.
And of course, you can push it with your little finger and it will move.
Say some water.
And you understand that it can also rotate around the vertical axis.
People will think I did this all by myself. Okay. Thank you.
So, you know, I have the feeling, Laura's here somewhere, I have the feeling that slides may be anticlimactic. Do you, I see, I think Laura should give an answer to that. Should we go on with the slides, or should we start talking? Talk, don't you think? You, because I think that don't you think so? Because I mean, it's getting later all the time. I talk too much, and I think that you know, the slides, I think they'll show you more variety. But I think that this you've had the essence of it. I think that we come down on this floor now. Isn't that how that's arranged? Isn't that the prudent thing to do? Yeah, yeah. We should stop now. Yeah. Oh, you gave it to me. We get a different kind of microphone. Brakes on these too.
George has made my job and all of our job trying to understand his work very easy indeed. It was wonderful to see the videotape and to hear all that you had to say about it. The other, recently I had the occasion to go up to see George's studio in the country. And doing that, one has a rather remarkable sense of George's involvement, not only with all the wonderful sculptures that you saw in the videotape, and that George has talked about various recent projects, but also George and his wife Edie have a wonderful collection of art. This collection of art features a great number of figurative works. One cannot help but be struck walking into their house, seeing several walls covered with works that stress the figure. Do you ever feel sorry that you have to leave the figure out of your art?
Not a bit. No, I think that there's still a room for the figure, but I think it would be if the figure comes into my art, it comes in traditional ways. And of course, I was brought up to draw and to paint after nature, and I still draw after nature. So I think that this is a separate existence, but I've thought that when the tools really get too heavy, see, I may pick up a paintbrush again.
One thing one is very impressed by in considering Rickey's work is the quality that he brings to his art in public places, that it cares just as much about the public as it cares about the art in his pieces. I've questioned George about this recently, and I'd like him to sort of expand on his notion about how much he thinks about the public as he makes his sculptures that end up in public places.
Well, of course, my answer, I gave it before, I'll give it again, is I don't think about the public at all. Except possibly their security. I don't want these pieces to fall on them. But I think the point I would make is that these are, in a way, composed to have a life of their own, to behave as they can, and not to invite any sort of predetermined response.
Now, what would you attribute to the fact that the public likes your work so much?
I think that's their problem. I think that it's not that I'm indifferent to it. You see, I enjoy that. You see, I like it very much. But I think that it is not in my mind to secure a response. You see, I think that is the role of the theater, and also of the novelist. You see, but I think that I am not thinking when I make these. How will this have the right effect, bring about the right response? Can I adjust it so that it will bring out more response? I think that's not in my thinking at all. I want to see what it is possible to have it do. So I'm interested in how it behaves, but not in its performance. Now, I suddenly remember I had this classical education. There was a phrase, ad captandum, Latin, and that is saying things, making things ad captandum is in order to seize, to capture a response. And I think I'm not interested in that. I'm very much interested in how I can make it perform by itself all alone, without theater. And as a matter of fact, a problem I have with some of these big public pieces is that the patron, trying to be very gracious and nice and cooperative, says, well, we'll get a lot of lights on it. And I don't want that, you see. I think that at night, I am happiest if it is unlit, with no special lighting, and is just left by itself to respond to whatever ambient, accidental lighting is around, whether it is the moon or the street lights or a car coming around the corner, and in between, it disappears. I think that's just great, you see.
You're 80, and you show no signs of diminished creativity. The other day when I was visiting you in the country, you expressed the same kind of delight over the Rotterdam piece that you showed tonight for everyone that was here. Would you discuss your feelings about art and the aging process?
Sheer luck. I think that history indicates that the visual arts are a healthy profession. See, of course, the star is Titian, you see, who was born in 1477 and died in 1576, if his birth date is correct. And that's I remember this from my art history days. The evidence is a letter from Titian, which is dated, in which he gives his age. And we think he lied about it. But when you think just in our time of how old Picasso, Matisse, Chagall, 80 is not old for an artist at all. And of course, there are some who died. Seurat died in his 30s. Quite a number died in their 30s. But I think in the visual arts, maturity tends to come very late. It's different from poetry, it's different from music, it's different from mathematics, where you can have child prodigies, but there are no child prodigies in art. The nearest probably is Picasso, who did marvelous drawings, paintings when he was 15. Masaccio died at 26 or 27. But there's scarcely a case per century of this sort of early maturation of visual artists. So I think that, maybe 81 is just coming into one's prime.
Now, you were 42 when you started making sculpture. Why did it take you so long to start doing something you do so well?
Well, I was busy teaching history, I was busy painting, I was busy being in the army. That occupied quite a lot of time. And I think it didn't really occur to me to shift out of painting until I had a sort of confirmation of mechanical aptitude. So there was something in my hands that I wasn't using. And I now realize that there was something in the genes waiting to be used, because my father was an engineer. He went to MIT, and my grandfather was the clockmaker in Athol, Massachusetts. And I think that I was lucky in choosing my parents and grandparents. But I think that it's very hard to I think for an artist to say why he chooses to do something. There are elements of chance, of opportunity, and I think that I've been painting, and I was very interested in painting. I still am, painted through several phases. Two of the slides I have that you're not seeing are portraits. That's, as I say, just to show my credentials, you see. But I think that I began to feel that there was something that possibly I could use that I wasn't using, and that I should have a stab at it. And this happened really in 1949, 1950, and almost from one day to the next. You see, I have no training as a sculptor at all. I've looked at a lot of sculpture. I'm very interested in sculpture, you see, from the Egyptians and the Greeks on. But I've no training in that, and so I'm not really, they call me a sculptor because I work in 3 dimensions, or now 4, but I didn't come into that legitimately. But I think that the studies, I mean, what I learned as a painter, I think it all feeds into this. I think what one's eye is being sensitized.
If you could work in any urban setting that you would like, what would it be?
Urban setting.
Your sculptures are now in enormous numbers of urban settings around the world. And you're a person who lives in the deep country. And in many ways, to see your sculptures, as we did in the videotape, against a backdrop of nature is both beautiful but also very confusing. They seem to animate themselves most dramatically against the geometry of international style architecture.
Oh, I would heartily disagree with that. And I think you're probably saying it to provoke me. No, I think my work looks best in the country. It's very imprudent of me to say this, you see, but I think it looks best in close relation with nature.
Why do you suppose it ends up in an urban context so often?
I suppose because the opportunities are there. I mean, I think that after all, I'm not in control of where my pieces are chosen to go. Somebody else is in control of that. I'm in control of saying no, and I sometimes have said no. But I think that that question should really be asked of builders, architects, developers, and so on, not of me. They are the ones who choose to have the pieces. I don't choose to put them there. I respond.
You, amongst a very, very small percentage of artists, don't have a gallery that you're affiliated with. You've disassociated yourself from that system for artists to get their work into the public. How do you feel about a system that now seems to be so entwined with the marketplace?
This is a complete change of topic, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I do not have a dealer in the sense that no dealer has me. And that is a happy situation, and it results in my dealing with a number of dealers on very friendly terms of mutual confidence. But I've had experience, being in a dealer's stable, and I think I'm very lucky to be able to do it this way, and I think there's mutual satisfaction. I think there has to be a dealer system, but I'm not sure that it has to be that you are owned like a racehorse. But I'm not. It's not in my ambition to change that system. See, I've got other things to do, and this is a complex topic. I think it's very imprudent of me to talk about it in New York, which is the most dealered city in the world, and I'm very lucky to have relations here and elsewhere with dealers that I respect very much and with whom I get along very well, and I think both they and I have prospered.
I have one last question for you before we turn it over to the audience. What do you want people to see in your work when they see it?
I'm pausing. See, that's very much your question. It's not my question. See, it goes back to the first question. It really repeats it in another form. And I think, quite honestly, I just don't think about what I want them to see. I'm not sure that I have any want in that direction. I'm happy if there is a response. The form of the response, I think I would not be able to define or want to define. I think I'm very happy if there's a response. But you see, if I were to presuppose or insist or hope for a certain kind of response, I think I would be in the theater. And I'm not in the theater. I'm not sure you're answered. You're going to ask me that a third time.
No, it surprised me when we've talked about this before and when we talked about it in your earlier response, because your work seems so clearly designed to delight, to cause people to marvel at their quality of movement and to the way they can reflect it with time and in time and with movement, that it surprises me that you feel such a sense of distance or indifference to your audience.
No, it is not indifference. It is not indifference. I think that it is that I'm not out to capture them. That is not a motive. And I think that is, it is really a false question, you see, because I think that the art can be, the visual arts, you see, it's different with the theater, it's different with music, it's different with literature, where the communication is on a different basis. But I think that it is not a way to judge art by its the effectiveness of the artist securing a response. I think that's wrong. I think that is, well, but by wrong, I mean it is misthought. See, it's not morally wrong, you see, but it is off the point. And I think that to make a kind of metaphor, what is the blooming rose's purpose in being a rose?
Well, it's a delight to it's a delight for all of us to be in the presence of a blooming rose. And there are a couple of questions which I'd like to share with George, and I would ask him to realize strongly that these are their questions.
Yeah.
The first one that, as I move through them very quickly, is what toys did you enjoy most as a child?
It's a long time ago. And no age is given. But I enjoyed very much hammers and nails. I was given by my father a little steam engine to put together. I probably was 10 years old. That gave me great pleasure. I was given some tools. I'm thinking of when I was probably younger than 10. I was also given a fountain pen. I was very pleased with that. I was pleased to have a bicycle. My mother, I was in a big family. I had a family of 6. And my mother always gave us books at Christmas. And I did read the books. I now think some of those books were terrible. But they were I don't mean something like Uncle Tom's Cabin, you see, but we were given books that were a little bit like that. You see, sometimes my mother, I think she had it suggested to her. We were sometimes given classics, but sometimes things that I now consider, barely literature, but they were famous at the time. But toys. Well, I'm not sure, apart from those things, I went in for toys very much.
When did you see your first metronome? Because it obviously made a big impact on you.
No, because what I was describing, you see, earlier was the function of a metronome. You see, that's how the time is set on a metronome, by the method I described. Probably, I was probably in my teens, because we did not have one in the house. We had some music. My sisters learned to play the piano. I rather resented that they were given lessons and that I wasn't, but they never brought home a metronome. But I think by the time I was 15, I knew what a metronome was. And but much earlier than that, I knew what a grandfather clock was. And incidentally, I have at home, up in East Chatham, in my front hall, a grandfather clock made by my grandfather.
The other questions are excellent. I'm just going to ask George one more of the questions, though. How did you gain your engineering expertise?
I don't have any. But I have no training as an engineer at all. I had high school physics. I had mathematics up to a certain point. I was fairly good at those. I was interested in it. The moments, for example, that I speak of, the force times the distance, that's the moment of rotation. I think I knew about that when I was maybe 15. But I was always interested in mechanical things, in ships, how things worked. Of course, those things were, when I was a boy, those things were much simpler than they are now. I grew up in Scotland on the River Clyde. You see, a great big harbor. There were these paddle boats. You see, that's how we went from place to place on those paddle steamers. And I loved going into that engine room and seeing these machines workings. I think that I was rather mechanical, and I think that. But I think my father hoped that I would be an engineer. I think I disappointed him. He hoped I'd go to MIT too. But instead of that, I studied history. You see, I think that was hard for him. He felt a little better when I got a job teaching history. I think that he thought, that I wouldn't be home for a handout. But I think he was probably appalled that I was thinking of being an artist. I think he was quite nice about it, but I think he was appalled. And my mother was a great reader. She was born in Schenectady. Her father was a lawyer. I escaped being a lawyer too. And she had read very widely and remembered everything, the names of the characters. And she read to all of us. You see that as children, every night something would be read aloud. Well, I think that's much more important than toys.
Well, it's clear that what makes artists artists is very mysterious, especially when we realize that George Rickey has no engineering expertise and cares little or has no real sense of his audience's clear pleasure in his work. Thank you very much, George, for your presentation.
Well, that was, we didn't come to blows exactly, did we?
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.